September 16th, 2016. A quiet stretch of County Road M, just outside La Crosse, Wisconsin. It's just after 8 a.m. when a call comes into 911. A man's voice, shaking, barely able to form sentences. He says his wife has been hurt. Badly. He says a pipe came through the windshield of his car. He says it struck her in the head. Barbara Kendhammer was 46 years old. She lived in West Salem, Wisconsin, a small community not far from La Crosse. She worked part-time in the cafeteria at a local middle school, the kind of job that put her in daily contact with the community she'd lived in for most of her life. She and Todd had been married for 25 years. To the people who knew them, the Kendhammers looked like a family that had figured things out. Their daughter, Jessica Cervais, later said her parents were still very much in love, that they were in a really good time in their lives because they'd just welcomed their first grandchild and the family was financially comfortable. Just weeks before her death, Barbara and Todd had celebrated their 25th wedding anniversary. Their son, Jordan, and their daughter, Jessica, had grown up watching their parents build something steady, a marriage, a home, a small business on the side. Barbara wasn't a public figure. She wasn't someone whose name people outside her town would have recognized. She was, by every account from the people who loved her, simply present, in her children's lives, in her grandchild's life, in the daily rhythm of a town most people drive through without stopping. None of that told anyone what was coming. On the surface, Todd Kendhammer didn't look like a man capable of murder. He had a steady job. He worked on cars and built houses, and on the side, he ran a small business replacing windshields. He'd been married to Barbara for 25 years. He had 2 grown children who would later stand by him without hesitation. But as investigators started talking to people who knew the couple, the picture stopped being so simple. Some witnesses told detectives that Todd had a temper, that he was more controlling than doting when it came to Barbara. Others saw nothing of the kind. Detectives interviewed the Kendhammer children, who were adamant their father would never have hurt their mother. 2 very different versions of the same man. That contradiction would follow this case all the way to its end. Then came the question of where Todd and Barbara were actually going that morning. Todd told police they'd left home between 7:30 and 7:45 a.m., heading toward Holman, where he planned to pick up a truck that needed a new windshield. But when investigators contacted the truck's owner, the man said he'd never ordered a windshield from Todd. He didn't even need one, and Todd didn't know where he lived. Confronted with that, Todd's story shifted. He said he was actually going to see a friend of that man's. Then a third version emerged, naming someone else entirely, and there was something else, something that didn't need an interview to uncover. Barbara was scheduled to work that morning at West Salem Middle School, in the opposite direction from Holman. None of this proved a homicide had occurred. People misremember things. People panic. People give imprecise answers to police in the worst moment of their lives. But a story that changes shape every time someone asks about it isn't usually a story that's simply hard to remember. It's a story that wasn't true to begin with. Todd's account never changed on one point. The pipe came out of nowhere. He said it flew off the back of a passing truck, bounced once, and tore through the windshield directly into Barbara. He said he drove roughly 100 yards while trying to pull the 10-pound steel pipe off his wife, before the car came to rest in a grassy embankment. Once stopped, he says he pulled the pipe free, got Barbara out of the passenger seat, and began CPR. It's a vivid, specific account, and investigators set out to test every part of it. The first problem was the truck itself. Despite surveillance cameras along the route, including one at a horse ranch that captured the Kendhammer car passing by at almost 8 a.m., no vehicle matching Todd's description was ever seen heading the other way. The second problem was the pipe. When investigators tried to recreate the accident by dropping a similar pipe off a moving truck, it never behaved the way Todd said it had. Lab analysis of glass fragments from the car didn't support his version of events either, and dirt found on the pipe matched soil already present in the trunk of the car. There was no blood on the pipe at all. The third problem was Barbara herself. The autopsy described extensive blunt impact injuries to her head and neck that the medical examiner called inconsistent with Todd's account. 3 bone-deep cuts to the back of her head, a fractured skull, a broken nose, bruising and bleeding inside her lips, bruising on her biceps. There was also a fractured neck bone and muscle hemorrhaging consistent with strangulation, along with what appeared to be fingernail scratches on her neck and 2 torn fingernails. A single pipe through a windshield in one violent instant. That was Todd's story. But the injuries told a different story. Prosecutors would later argue the evidence recovered from the car indicated Barbara had been assaulted and the windshield smashed, while she wasn't even inside the vehicle. At that point, this stopped being a traffic case. On arrival, the first paramedic on scene finds Todd kneeling at his wife's feet. Her head is toward the road, her blood is on the rear passenger tire. Emergency responders find no glass shards on Barbara's body at all, despite a windshield supposedly just shattered around her. A passerby who saw the car in the ditch beforehand later tells investigators the windshield looked intact, the passenger door was open, and no one was around the vehicle. That last detail is the one that won't sit still. If the windshield was already broken and Barbara was already struck, why would a passing witness describe it as intact, with nobody near the car? Every piece of physical evidence, the glass, the pipe, the soil, the surveillance gaps, the timing, was about to be weighed against a single, narrow question. Did an accident happen on County Road M that morning? Or did Todd Kendhammer build one, minute by minute, after something else had already happened to his wife? Barbara Kendhammer was rushed to the hospital that morning, fighting injuries severe enough that survival was never guaranteed. She died the following day, never having regained the ability to tell anyone what had actually happened to her. In West Salem, the news moved fast, the way it does in a small town where everyone seems to know someone connected to everyone else. Friends and family described the Kendhammers as a couple still very much in love, a family at a good point in their lives. For most people who heard the story, the explanation was almost too strange to question. A pipe, a passing truck, a one-in-a-million stretch of bad luck. Tragic, but understandable. The kind of accident nobody could have prevented. What had started as a roadside tragedy, the kind that gets a paragraph in the local paper and a moment of silence at a school assembly, was now something else entirely. A homicide investigation centered on the one person who said he saw it happen, her husband. By the time the case reached trial, prosecutors had built their argument around three pillars. The accident, as described, was physically implausible. Barbara's injuries pointed to a violent assault rather than a single impact, and the crash scene had been built afterward to explain away what had already happened to her. District Attorney Tim Gruenke put it plainly to 48 hours, saying the medical examiner found Barbara's injuries were very inconsistent with a pipe of that size and weight coming through the windshield. Todd never wavered from the core of his story. He maintained that Barbara died in a freak accident and that authorities had questioned him from the very beginning. Then he did something defense attorneys often advise against. He took the stand in his own defense. It was a gamble. Testifying meant opening himself up to direct cross-examination from the prosecutor who'd spent over a year building a case against him. And it meant the jury would be watching not just what he said, but how he said it. On the stand, Todd told the jury he'd been distraught during his police interview, which was why he'd given different accounts of where he and Barbara were actually driving that morning. "I'm not in the right state of mind," he said. "I wasn't thinking of where I was going or what I was doing. I was thinking of Barb." But under questioning, he continued to struggle with the timeline, telling the jury about yet another person he claimed he'd been heading to see that morning, a third version of his destination. Grunke asked him directly, did he change his story for trial because he knew police had already caught his lies? Todd said no. His children never doubted him. "He doesn't lie," Jessica told 48 Hours. "So when he says he didn't do it, we believe him. But belief from family isn't the same as belief from 12 strangers weighing physical evidence." The jury now had to choose between two versions of the same man, a grieving husband whose memory had failed him under unimaginable stress, or someone using grief and trauma as cover for something he'd already done. After a 9-day trial, the jury delivered its verdict in December 2017, guilty of first-degree intentional homicide. In March 2018, Judge Todd Bjerke sentenced Todd Kendhammer to life in prison, with the possibility of extended supervision after 30 years. For the prosecution and for Barbara's case file, it was over. A jury had heard the medical evidence, the forensic testimony, the shifting statements, and reached a decision. But for Todd's family, the fight had only changed shape. His children, Jordan and Jessica, brought in high-profile attorneys Jerry Buting and Kathleen Stilling, securing Todd an evidentiary hearing to argue his original defense had been ineffective and that critical new evidence existed. At that 2021 hearing, a forensic pathologist testified that she believed Barbara's injuries likely weren't from a physical assault at all, but resulted from a vehicular accident. A memory expert also testified that Todd's struggles to recall events could be explained by psychological trauma from the incident. A crime scene analyst presented other documented cases of pipes piercing windshields across the country, arguing the phenomenon wasn't nearly as rare as prosecutors claimed. It wasn't enough. In May 2022, the motion for a new trial was denied, The Wisconsin Court of Appeals later affirmed that decision, rejecting all four arguments the defense had raised about ineffective counsel. The Wisconsin Supreme Court then declined to review the conviction at all. Through every appeal, every denial, Todd's children never wavered. They've maintained publicly, from the day of his arrest to today, that their father told them the truth. The legal system has now spoken at every level it can. But the argument over what actually happened on County Road M, an accident or a murder built to look like one, is still being made by people who knew Barbara and Todd best, and likely will be for a long time to come. Years later, the Todd Kendhammer case still doesn't have a clean ending. It sits at a difficult intersection. Forensic science that experts themselves disagree on, human memory that can fracture under trauma, and a piece of physical evidence, a single steel pipe, that became the entire battleground of a man's freedom. To some, the verdict was the only conclusion the evidence could support. The injuries, the missing truck, the shifting story, all pointing toward one outcome. Wisconsin's courts, at every level that reviewed it, agreed. To others, including the two people who knew Todd longest, questions remain. Jessica and Jordan have never accepted the verdict, and continue to say their father told them the truth. Defense experts have pointed to documented cases elsewhere in the country where pipes have, in fact, crashed through windshields in ways resembling Todd's account. The debate is likely to continue for as long as people keep examining this case, but beneath the competing theories, the appeals, the forensic disputes, one fact has never been in question. Barbara Kendhammer died on September 17, 2016. A husband and wife of 25 years became, in the space of one morning, a closed case file and an open wound. 2 children lost their mother and have spent the years since fighting for the man they call their father and for an answer to what really happened to the woman who raised them. Whatever else this case becomes, a cautionary story about forensic evidence, a debate about wrongful conviction, a lesson in how quickly an ordinary morning can turn irreversible, it began and it ends with Barbara. She was a wife, a mother, a woman who got into a car on a Friday morning and never came home.